The Avatar franchise doesn't just give us stunning visuals and groundbreaking technology, it presents some of cinema's most psychologically complex villains. From military colonialism to corporate greed, these antagonists represent the darkest aspects of human nature when faced with the unknown. And the scariest part, their motivations reflect real-world psychology that we see every day. Number 10. Dr. Gray's Augustine, early antagonist, scientific arrogance, and cultural superiority. Sigourney Weaver's Dr. Augustine initially represents the psychology of scientific colonialism, someone whose genuine desire for knowledge becomes tainted by cultural superiority and academic arrogance. Her early psychology shows how even well-intentioned scientists can develop paternalistic attitudes towards indigenous peoples. What makes her psychology interesting is her evolution from antagonist to ally, showing how exposure to Na'vi culture breaks down her academic prejudices and forces her to confront her own cultural biases. Her transformation represents the psychological journey from seeing the Na'vi as subjects to be studied to recognizing them as equals to be respected. Number 9. General Francis Ardmore, military authoritarianism and revenge psychology. Edie Falco's General Ardmore represents the psychology of military leadership consumed by the need to avenge previous defeats and establish human dominance through overwhelming force. Her psychology stems from the military's humiliation in the first film, creating a revenge-driven mindset that sees any resistance as a personal insult to human superiority. What makes her psychology dangerous is how she frames genocide as military necessity, using strategic language to distance herself from the moral implications of her orders. Her inability to see the Na'vi as anything other than obstacles to be eliminated shows how military training can dehumanize enemies to the point where war crimes become routine operations. Number 8. Captain Shawn Fike, toxic masculinity and military conditioning. Captain Fike represents the psychology of a soldier whose identity is so wrapped up in military hierarchy and masculine dominance that he can't function outside of combat situations. His psychology shows how military conditioning can create individuals who are only comfortable when they're in positions of power over others, making peaceful coexistence psychologically impossible. What makes his psychology tragic is how his need to prove his worth through violence prevents him from adapting to Pandora's unique challenges, making him a liability to his own mission. His aggressive approach to every situation shows how some people use violence as their primary tool for problem solving because they lack the psychological flexibility for other approaches. Number 7. Lyle Wainfleet, Recom, identity crisis and loyalty confusion. Matt Gerald's Lyle Wainfleet as a Recom represents the psychology of someone struggling with artificial memories and conflicted loyalties between his human programming and Na'vi body. His psychology is fascinating because he's essentially experiencing an identity crisis. He has human memories and military training, but his Na'vi body creates new sensory experiences and instincts. What makes his psychology complex is how he maintains loyalty to Quaritch, despite having a Na'vi form that should theoretically make him more sympathetic to the indigenous population. His struggle represents the psychological tension between nature and nurture, whether his Na'vi biology can overcome his human military conditioning. Number 6. Dr. Ivan Garvin, corporate psychopathy and profit obsession. Dr. Garvin represents the psychology of corporate scientists who've completely divorced their research from ethical considerations, viewing everything through the lens of profit potential and resource extraction. His psychology shows how corporate culture can create individuals who see living beings as nothing more than biological resources to be harvested and monetized. What makes his psychology chilling is his complete emotional detachment from the consequences of his research. He can discuss the destruction of entire ecosystems with the same tone he'd use to discuss quarterly earnings. His inability to see the Na'vi as sentient beings rather than biological curiosities shows how corporate conditioning can eliminate empathy and replace it with pure, acquisitive instinct. Number 5. Parker Selfridge, corporate greed and moral compartmentalization. Giovanni Ribisi's Parker Selfridge represents the psychology of corporate middle management, someone who's not inherently evil but whose need for career advancement makes him complicit in genocide. Selfridge's psychology shows how ordinary people can become monsters when they compartmentalize moral decisions and focus only on quarterly profits and shareholder value. What makes his psychology realistic and terrifying is how he genuinely doesn't see himself as evil. He's just doing his job, following orders, and trying to meet corporate expectations. His ability to discuss the destruction of home tree in purely economic terms shows how corporate culture can train people to dehumanize anything that interferes with profit margins. Number 4. Quaritch, Recom, Resurrection Trauma, and Vengeance Obsession. Stephen Lang's Recom Quaritch represents the psychology of someone dealing with resurrection trauma while maintaining his obsessive need for revenge against Jake Scully and the Na'vi. His psychology as a Recom is complex because he has all of his original memories but exists in a Na'vi body that should theoretically make him more connected to Pandora's ecosystem. What makes his psychology fascinating is how his human hatred and military conditioning override his Na'vi biology, showing that psychological conditioning can be stronger than physical instincts. His relationship with Spider creates internal conflict between his paternal instincts and his mission objectives, revealing cracks in his otherwise rigid military psychology. Number 3. Tulkun, Hunters, Whalers, Extractive Capitalism, and Dehumanization. The Tulkun hunters represent the psychology of people who've completely dehumanized their targets to the point where they can torture and kill highly intelligent beings for profit without psychological distress. Their psychology mirrors real-world whaling and hunting industries, where economic incentives override moral considerations about animal intelligence and suffering. What makes their psychology disturbing is how they've developed elaborate justifications for their cruelty, treating the extraction of Tulkun brain fluid as just another industrial process. Their ability to torture sentient beings while maintaining casual conversation shows how economic systems can create psychological frameworks that eliminate empathy entirely. This one's particularly disturbing because it mirrors real-world environmental destruction. How do people psychologically justify destroying intelligent life for profit? The comments are going to be heated. Number 2. Colonel Quaritch, original, military supremacy and xenophobic hatred. Stephen Lang's original Quaritch represents the psychology of military colonialism taken to its most extreme conclusion, someone who sees any non-human intelligence as an existential threat to human dominance. Quaritch's psychology is built on the belief that humans are inherently superior and that any resistance to human expansion is an act of war that justifies genocidal response. His facial scars represent both his physical and psychological wounds from Pandora, creating a personal vendetta that transforms military duty into obsessive revenge. What makes his psychology terrifying is how he uses military honor and duty to justify actions that are clearly war crimes, showing how institutional authority can corrupt individual moral judgment. His inability to see the Na'vi as anything other than obstacles to human progress represents the psychology of colonialism, the belief that primitive peoples have no right to resist advanced civilizations. His final moments show someone so committed to his worldview that he'd rather die than admit he might be wrong about Na'vi intelligence and rights. Number 1. The RDA Corporation, collective psychology, systemic greed, and environmental destruction. The RDA represents the most terrifying villain in the Avatar franchise because it's not a person. It's a system that creates and rewards psychopathic behavior while insulating individuals from moral responsibility. The corporate psychology operates on the principle that profit maximization justifies any action, no matter how destructive, as long as it can be legally defended and financially rationalized. What makes the RDA psychology most disturbing is how it creates a diffusion of responsibility, where no individual feels accountable for collective atrocities. Everyone is just following orders or meeting targets. The corporation's ability to frame genocide as a resource acquisition and environmental destruction as development shows how language can be weaponized to hide moral reality. Their long-term planning for Pandora's colonization reveals a psychology that sees entire worlds as nothing more than assets to be stripped and monetized regardless of existing life. The RDA psychology represents the ultimate expression of capitalism without conscience, a system that rewards sociopathic behavior and punishes empathy as inefficient. What makes this number 1 is how the RDA's collective psychology creates all the other villains in the franchise. It's the system that produces Quaritches, Selfridges, and corporate scientists by rewarding their worst impulses while punishing their better angels.